For decades, European prehistory was taught as a clean, linear story. First came the hunter-gatherers, roaming forests and plains for tens of thousands of years. Then, around 8,000 years ago, farming arrived from the Near East. Agriculture spread, villages appeared, populations grew, and the hunters supposedly vanished, replaced, absorbed, forgotten. It was a simple story, and for a long time it felt convincing. Farming brought permanent settlements, food surplus, domesticated animals, and new tools. Compared to a mobile lifestyle dependent on hunting and gathering, agriculture looked like progress. Many scholars of the 20th century assumed that organized farming societies would naturally overwhelm smaller, mobile groups. The idea fit neatly into a broader belief that human history moved forward in straight lines, from primitive to advanced. But that narrative left out something essential. It ignored how deeply adapted Europe's hunter-gatherers already were. These populations had survived ice ages, volcanic winters, drastic climate swings, and the extinction of megafauna. They had outlived the Neanderthals. They knew the land with extraordinary precision: animal behavior, seasonal cycles, river systems, forests, coastlines. Europe was not an empty stage waiting for farmers. It was a living, occupied landscape shaped by people who had been there for tens of thousands of years. Most importantly, the old narrative assumed replacement where there was, in reality, coexistence. Europe was never a single population replacing another in a clean sweep. It was a patchwork: genetic, cultural, and ecological. Groups overlapped, interacted, competed, adapted, merged, separated, and sometimes returned after centuries of apparent decline. This complexity remained hidden for a long time, not because it wasn't real, but because science lacked the tools to see it. That changed with ancient DNA. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to Primal Roots. To understand why this discovery was so disruptive, we need to step back to the world after the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, massive ice sheets retreated northward. Frozen tundra gave way to forests, rivers, wetlands, and expanding ecosystems filled with deer, wild boar, fish, wolves, bears, and birds. Europe became one of the richest environments on the planet for mobile hunter-gatherer societies. These groups were not uniform. Different regions hosted distinct hunter-gatherer populations with their own traditions, technologies, and genetic profiles. Coastal groups relied heavily on fishing and marine resources. Forest populations specialized in large and small game. River systems supported complex seasonal movement patterns. Europe, even before farming, was diverse. When the first farmers arrived from Anatolia and the Fertile Crescent between 8,000 and 7,000 BCE, they entered this dynamic world. They brought wheat, barley, domesticated animals, polished stone tools, and a radically different way of organizing life. Villages replaced seasonal camps. Fields replaced foraging routes. Land became something to divide, fence, and control. From an archaeological perspective, the change looked dramatic. Pottery styles shifted. Animal bones from wild species declined in some areas, while domesticated species increased. Permanent houses appeared where temporary shelters once stood. For early researchers, these material changes seemed to confirm population replacement. But material culture can be misleading. People can adopt tools without being replaced. They can change diets without disappearing. Technologies spread faster than genes. What looked like disappearance may have been transformation or temporary retreat. Even before genetics, cracks in the old story were visible. In many parts of Europe, evidence showed hunter-gatherer lifestyles continuing for centuries, sometimes millennia, alongside farming communities. Coastal populations kept eating mostly fish long after agriculture arrived. Flint tools typical of hunter-gatherers appeared in surprisingly late contexts. Dense forests and rugged terrain remained dominated by mobile groups far longer than expected. These signs were often dismissed as exceptions. Ancient DNA turned those exceptions into the rule. When scientists began extracting genetic material from Mesolithic and Neolithic skeletons, the results were unexpected. Hunter-gatherer lineages had not vanished. In fact, in some regions, their genetic contribution increased after farming was already established. Lineages that seemed nearly gone suddenly reappeared with strength, as if populations pushed to the margins had returned. This directly contradicted the replacement model. Instead of a one-way process, Europe experienced cycles. Farmers expanded, struggled, stabilized, and sometimes declined. Hunter-gatherers retreated, adapted, persisted in marginal zones, and later re-entered the genetic and social landscape. In several regions, male hunter-gatherer lineages became dominant again, reshaping local populations from within. This was not peaceful assimilation alone, nor was it simple conquest. It was a complex mix of coexistence, competition, alliance, conflict, and intermarriage, played out differently in every landscape. What ancient DNA revealed is that early European history was not about one way of life eliminating another. It was about long-term interaction between two highly capable survival strategies. Farming was powerful, but fragile. It depended on climate stability, soil quality, and predictable seasons. Hunter-gatherer life, while lower in population density, was flexible, mobile, and resilient. When environments shifted, as they often did, those advantages mattered. The idea that hunter-gatherers quietly faded away is no longer defensible. They were not background characters in Europe's story. They were active participants, adapting to new pressures, exploiting new opportunities, and reasserting their presence when conditions allowed. The collapse of the old narrative begins here. Once we accept that hunter-gatherers did not disappear, the entire story of European origins changes. The continent's population was shaped not by replacement, but by repeated interaction. What we see today is not the result of a single revolution, but of thousands of years of tension, exchange, and resilience. And this realization sets the stage for what comes next. The direct encounter between farmers and hunter-gatherers, and the hidden dynamics that allowed ancient lineages to survive and return when no one expected them to. When the first farming communities moved into Europe, they did not step into an empty land. They entered territories shaped by long-established populations whose lives were built around mobility, seasonal knowledge, and intimate familiarity with local ecosystems. Forests, rivers, wetlands, and coastlines were already mapped in human memory. Every migration route of animals, every spawning ground of fish, and every natural shelter was known through generations of experience. The encounter between farming societies and hunter-gatherer groups was not a brief event, but a prolonged process that unfolded over centuries, varying widely across regions and environments. Agricultural populations arrived with a new relationship to land. Fields were cleared, seeds planted, and harvest cycles planned months in advance. Villages became fixed points in the landscape, anchored by storage structures, animal enclosures, and communal buildings. This sedentary life allowed for higher population densities and long-term accumulation of resources, but it also created new vulnerabilities. Crops tied survival to local climate conditions. Settlements depended on predictable seasons and stable soil. When those conditions failed, entire communities were placed at risk. Hunter-gatherer groups operated under a fundamentally different logic. Their survival strategies were built on movement, diversification, and flexibility. Food sources shifted with the seasons, and territories were adjusted rather than defended through permanent structures. This mobility provided a significant advantage in unpredictable environments, particularly in dense forests, mountainous regions, river valleys, and coastal zones where farming was difficult to sustain. Rather than being displaced everywhere at once, hunter-gatherers maintained strongholds in areas that resisted agricultural expansion. The earliest phases of contact were not marked by immediate violence or domination. Archaeological evidence indicates long periods of coexistence. Tools typical of farming societies appear in hunter-gatherer contexts, while traditional flint technologies persist within early agricultural villages. Ceramics, ornaments, and burial practices show signs of gradual blending rather than abrupt replacement. These patterns suggest sustained interaction, observation, and selective adoption of practices rather than forced assimilation. Geography played a decisive role in shaping these relationships. In fertile river valleys and open plains, agriculture expanded rapidly. In forested regions, wetlands, and northern coastlines, hunter-gatherer lifeways persisted far longer. In many areas, farming and foraging economies existed side by side, separated not by time, but by terrain. This uneven spread prevented any single model of dominance from emerging across the continent. Population structure further complicated the balance. Farming communities often contained larger, denser populations clustered around villages. This increased labor capacity but also heightened exposure to disease, nutritional stress, and social stratification. Hunter-gatherer groups, smaller and more dispersed, faced lower population growth but benefited from reduced disease transmission and diets rich in diverse proteins and micronutrients. Skeletal evidence from multiple regions indicates that early farmers frequently suffered from nutritional deficiencies, dental disease, and reduced stature compared to neighboring foraging populations. These biological differences had long-term consequences. Physical robustness and ecological knowledge provided hunter-gatherer groups with resilience during periods of environmental stress. Climatic fluctuations repeatedly disrupted early agricultural systems, leading to crop failures, food shortages, and population decline. During such episodes, mobile groups were better positioned to adapt, relocate, and recover. These cycles of instability created opportunities for renewed interaction and demographic shifts. Social organization also influenced outcomes. Early farming societies tended toward more hierarchical structures, with clearer divisions of labor, property control, and inheritance. Hunter-gatherer groups generally maintained more flexible and egalitarian systems, allowing rapid reorganization in response to changing conditions. These contrasting social models shaped how each group responded to conflict, alliance, and integration. Defensive structures such as ditches and palisades appear in some early farming settlements, suggesting concerns over security and competition. Hunter-gatherers, lacking fixed settlements to defend, relied on mobility and landscape familiarity as primary strategies. Competition for resources intensified as agricultural expansion altered the environment. Forest clearing reduced game habitats, while fenced fields restricted access to traditional foraging areas. These changes disrupted established movement patterns and increased pressure on remaining wild resources. In some regions, this led to direct conflict. In others, it resulted in negotiated coexistence or gradual absorption of practices across group boundaries. The archaeological record preserves evidence of both outcomes, often within the same geographic zone over different periods. Dietary analysis reveals another layer of complexity. Isotopic studies show that many populations maintained mixed subsistence strategies for centuries. Farming communities continued to hunt, fish, and gather wild plants, while hunter-gatherers selectively adopted cultivated foods and domesticated animals. These hybrid economies challenge the notion of clear cultural boundaries. Instead, they point to adaptive responses shaped by local conditions rather than ideological commitment to a single way of life. Genetic evidence adds a crucial dimension to this picture. Across multiple regions, ancient DNA indicates asymmetric patterns of admixture. In many cases, hunter-gatherer male lineages became increasingly prominent within communities that otherwise displayed agricultural material culture. This pattern suggests social dynamics that favored the integration of hunter-gatherer men into farming populations or the displacement of agricultural male lineages. The mechanisms behind this shift remain debated, but likely include a combination of conflict, alliance formation, and social restructuring during periods of instability. Such patterns were not isolated. Central Europe, Iberia, parts of France, and northern Italy all exhibit evidence of renewed hunter-gatherer genetic influence long after the establishment of agriculture. These changes did not occur simultaneously and followed regional trajectories shaped by climate, ecology, and population density. The result was a continent-wide mosaic of interactions rather than a uniform process. Cultural transmission moved in both directions. Farmers adopted local hunting techniques, fishing methods, and navigation knowledge essential for survival in unfamiliar environments. Hunter-gatherers incorporated pottery, new tool forms, and, in some cases, limited cultivation into their subsistence strategies. This exchange blurred distinctions and produced communities that cannot be easily classified as purely agricultural or purely foraging. Certain regions illustrate this complexity with particular clarity. In Northern Europe, coastal populations maintained marine-based economies for millennia, despite proximity to farming settlements. In the Baltic and parts of Scandinavia, fishing and seal hunting remained dominant long after crops and livestock were available. In mountainous zones, seasonal mobility persisted as a primary strategy, limiting the spread of permanent villages. These areas became reservoirs of hunter-gatherer traditions that would later contribute to broader demographic shifts. Environmental volatility repeatedly reshaped the balance between these worlds. Periods of cooling, drought, and flooding disrupted farming systems and reduced carrying capacity in marginal zones. Each climatic downturn weakened sedentary communities and reinforced the advantages of mobility and diversified subsistence. Over time, these fluctuations created windows during which hunter-gatherer populations expanded their influence, both culturally and genetically. By the late Neolithic, Europe was no longer divided between two opposing lifestyles. It had become a landscape of blended practices, regional adaptations, and shifting social structures. Communities varied widely in how they balanced cultivation, herding, hunting, and foraging. The persistence of hunter-gatherer strategies within this system was not a sign of resistance to change, but evidence of their continued effectiveness under certain conditions. This prolonged interaction laid the groundwork for future transformations. The coexistence of mobility and sedentism created societies capable of absorbing new influences without collapsing. Knowledge of long-distance movement, ecological adaptation, and flexible social organization remained embedded within populations that outwardly appeared agricultural. These inherited traits would prove critical when a new force entered the European landscape. The encounter between farmers and hunter-gatherers did not produce a final victor. It produced a hybrid foundation. Out of tension, cooperation, and repeated adjustment emerged populations shaped by both traditions. This foundation set the stage for the next major demographic shift, when highly mobile pastoral groups from the Eurasian steppes began moving westward, interacting with societies already accustomed to complexity, adaptation, and change. By the late Neolithic, Europe was no longer defined by a single way of life. Centuries of interaction between farming societies and mobile foraging groups had produced a complex human landscape marked by genetic diversity, cultural hybridity, and ecological adaptability. The continent had become resilient, not because one population had prevailed, but because multiple survival strategies had been woven together over time. This foundation prepared Europe for the most transformative demographic event of prehistoric times, the arrival of highly mobile pastoral populations from the Eurasian steppes. These steppe groups emerged from regions north of the Black and Caspian Seas, where open grasslands favored a lifestyle centered on animal herding and long-distance mobility. Their economies relied on cattle, sheep, and horses, allowing rapid movement across vast territories. Advances in animal traction, wheeled vehicles, and early metalworking provided additional advantages. Social organization within these groups emphasized strong kin-based hierarchies, particularly along male lineages, creating tightly coordinated communities capable of sustained expansion. When steppe populations began moving westward between approximately 3300 and 2800 BCE, they encountered societies already shaped by long-term coexistence between farming and foraging traditions. Europe at this stage was neither uniformly agricultural nor culturally rigid. Many communities practiced mixed subsistence strategies, maintained regional exchange networks, and retained knowledge of mobility inherited from earlier hunter-gatherer ancestors. This complexity facilitated interaction rather than immediate collapse or displacement. Genetic evidence reveals that the impact of steppe migrations was profound, especially along paternal lines. In many regions, Y chromosome lineages associated with steppe populations rapidly increased in frequency, often replacing earlier male lineages within a few centuries. This pattern mirrors earlier demographic shifts involving hunter-gatherers and farmers, suggesting that asymmetric integration along male lines was a recurring feature of European prehistory. However, this process did not erase existing populations. Instead, steppe ancestry was layered onto an already diverse genetic foundation. Archaeological records reflect this fusion clearly. Cultural complexes such as corded ware in Central and Northern Europe display material traditions combining steppe burial customs with local agricultural practices and older lithic technologies. Stone tools, polished axes, early metal objects, and symbolic artifacts appear together, signaling continuity alongside innovation. These societies did not abandon their past. They reorganized it within new social frameworks. The success of steppe populations cannot be attributed solely to technology or mobility. Environmental conditions played a crucial role. Climatic variability during the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age placed stress on purely sedentary farming systems. Pastoral economies capable of relocating herds in response to changing conditions offered flexibility in uncertain environments. Communities that integrated herding, cultivation, hunting, and foraging were better equipped to survive repeated ecological disruptions. This adaptability extended beyond subsistence. Steppe influence reshaped social organization, introducing more stratified systems centered on lineage, status, and martial symbolism. Burial practices emphasize weapons, ornaments, and markers of prestige, reflecting changing concepts of authority and identity. Yet beneath these visible transformations, older traditions persisted. Knowledge of landscapes, seasonal cycles, and resource management, rooted in hunter-gatherer experience, remained embedded in daily life. Trade networks expanded dramatically during this period. Routes established by mobile foragers and early farmers facilitated the movement of steppe populations and their goods. Amber from the Baltic, copper from southern Europe, tin from Atlantic regions, and obsidian from eastern Mediterranean sources circulated across vast distances. These exchanges accelerated technological diffusion, including advances in metallurgy that would define the Bronze Age. Language evolution likely followed similar pathways of integration. Many scholars associate the spread of Indo-European languages with steppe migrations, but linguistic replacement was neither instantaneous nor uniform. Vocabulary related to farming, ecology, and local environments suggests deep continuity with earlier populations. The languages that emerged were not purely imported systems, but hybrid forms, shaped through prolonged contact and cultural negotiation. Regional variation remained a defining feature of this synthesis. In Iberia, steppe ancestry arrived later and interacted with populations already carrying strong hunter-gatherer genetic signatures that had resurged during the Neolithic. In northern Europe, steppe groups fused with communities possessing extensive maritime traditions, creating societies skilled in both terrestrial and coastal mobility. In the Alpine and Balkan regions, mountainous terrain moderated the pace and nature of integration, preserving localized adaptations. Over time, these blended populations gave rise to new cultural identities that cannot be traced to a single origin. The Bronze Age societies that followed were built upon a tri-layered foundation. Early European hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers from the Near East, and steppe pastoralists from Eurasia. Each contributed essential elements. Foragers provided ecological knowledge, mobility, and resilience. Farmers introduced domestication, long-term settlement, and landscape transformation. Steppe groups added expanded mobility, new social structures, and technological innovations. Genomic studies confirmed this threefold ancestry across modern European populations. While proportions vary by region, traces of all three components remain present. This genetic mosaic reflects not a moment of origin, but a long process of interaction, adaptation, and recombination. No single population replaced the others entirely. Instead, survival depended on integration. The persistence of hunter-gatherer ancestry throughout this process challenges deeply rooted assumptions about progress and dominance. Rather than being eliminated by agriculture or overshadowed by later migrations, these ancient populations continuously shaped outcomes. Their strategies proved valuable under shifting conditions, repeatedly reasserting influence when rigid systems faltered. This pattern carries broader implications for understanding human history. Technological change alone does not determine survival. Ecological flexibility, social adaptability, and cultural exchange are equally decisive. The European case illustrates how diversity within populations can act as a buffer against environmental and social instability, allowing societies to absorb shocks and reorganize rather than collapse. By the onset of the Bronze Age, Europe had become a continent defined by connectivity. Mobility linked distant regions. Exchange networks transmitted ideas, materials, and traditions. Cultural boundaries were permeable, shaped more by environment and interaction than by strict divisions. The foundations of later European civilizations were already in place, formed not through linear advancement, but through layered coexistence. The long-term legacy of this prehistoric synthesis extends beyond genetics and material culture. It influenced patterns of settlement, land use, social hierarchy, and worldview. Many mythological themes that appear in later European traditions reflect deep roots in hunter-gatherer cosmologies, blended with agricultural fertility symbolism and steppe concepts of lineage and power. These narratives, passed down and reshaped over millennia, preserve echoes of the continent's deep past. Seen through the lens of modern science, Europe's origins are not a story of disappearance, but of continuity through transformation. Populations adapted, merged, and re-emerged in response to changing conditions. Each wave of change carried forward elements of what came before, creating a cumulative heritage rather than a series of replacements. The ancient DNA revolution has made this process visible, revealing connections once hidden beneath layers of time. What emerges is a portrait of humanity defined not by conquest alone, but by endurance and exchange. The people of prehistoric Europe were not passive recipients of change. They actively shaped their world, drawing on diverse traditions to navigate uncertainty. This final synthesis marks the end of a long prehistoric journey, but not the end of its influence. The genetic, cultural, and ecological patterns established during this period continue to shape European populations today. Beneath modern identities lies a shared inheritance forged through tens of thousands of years of adaptation. Europe, in its deepest sense, is not the product of a single origin or a single revolution. It is the outcome of repeated encounters between different ways of life, each leaving an indelible mark. The hunter-gatherers never truly vanished. They became part of a larger whole, their legacy carried forward in the very structure of the continent's people. Discover how ancient DNA reshaped everything we thought we knew about Europe's origins. Follow the series and explore the hidden forces that shaped humanity's deep past.